We have been making music for a very long time. Evidences of the music of man have been found going back more than 30,000 years. This series of programs is not meant to be a complete history of music, for such a claim would be presumptuous. It is rather my purpose to touch upon those aspects of music and the work of some of its most important figures, which may help to reveal why, to me, man's very identity is music. That music from the C major fugue of Johann Sebastian Bach's third sonata for solo violin is the music of a man at peace, reflecting in its measured rhythms and balanced form a society secure in its faith. Such music contains more than feeling. I believe it tells us of the close connection between music and our very process of thought. In fact, I believe that music helped teach man how to think, by comparison, analogy, and the refinement of memory. But the path to reach the exalted level attained by Bach has been a long one, and we are still struggling to keep to it. The apparently solid world we take for granted began in the torrid heat of molten stone and swirling gases, transforming itself over eons of time into a cosmos cool enough to allow the first faint stirrings of life. On this planet, apparently unique at least in our solar system, an extraordinary balance of natural forces has evolved. The pendulum swings from hot to cold, from height to depth, without exceeding the precise conditions needed for life. Yet that boiling unrest persists deep inside the Earth, sending us earthquakes and tidal waves to remind us of our powerlessness before nature from the moment of our birth. Here in our garden, on this beautiful spring day, the sense of life is everywhere. It cries out like that newborn babe. The air clear and mild, the world at its best. But the baby can't know this. His cry asserts his new independence and perhaps a premonition of responsibility and hope. It is both a joyful greeting and a regretful farewell. His lungs acknowledge the new realm of air, but he carries a sharp memory of that warmth, comfort, and safety he knew in the aquatic womb. He also remembers sounds, for even there he responded to voices, to rhythms, and to music. But above all, he remembers the mother's heartbeat. This rhythm unites the developing fetus to its mother, remaining deep within us long after we emerge into the light of day, imprinted on us like our identity. We feel its loss and must replace it with other sounds, especially that of our own voice, for sound and rhythm are communication. We heard long before we could see. We children play animal games. This music, so vital in the long and complex tradition of Africa, is living evidence of man's perpetual need for music. Today, as tens of thousands of years ago, man harvests natural crops and hunts wild prey, depending on all his senses for information. In that translucent light and air, he could see and hear for miles, smell the coming storms, detect the movement of prowling beasts. No instrument altered the balance of power more swiftly in man's favor than the discovery of the bow and arrow, giving him control over the animal from a distance. Yet this was not a weapon of war, but still a matching of forces, for the relationship between man and beast was part of a ritual. Only the necessity for food made them antagonists. Thus the hunt entered the tradition of song and dance in which the bow and arrow were more than symbols, for the bow could produce a melodious twang. It is widely held, in fact, that the bow and arrow are ancestors to the violin. Yet the bow and arrow may themselves have evolved from the ground bow, a musical instrument still to be found in many parts of Africa. Either way, the bow became Ukona's instrument, with a gourd attached as a resonator and the arrow as a striking stick. The Gui also have other kinds of music made by the women. In fact, throughout Africa, women are most often the chief music makers. In this game, the women toss a melon, one of the main crops in the Kalahari, making the music as well, while the men try to interfere. So much of our musical history is lost in time. We cannot say how long ago the bow became a musical instrument. Yet tantalizing fragments do turn up. For instance, these mastodon hip and shoulder bones, found only a few years ago frozen deep in the Siberian ice. Keeping company with them were two small bone flutes and a bone carved as a beater. Resonating points were painted on the larger bones. The find is as exciting to musicians as to anthropologists, for it dates back some 35,000 years. Could this be a fragment of our oldest known orchestra? Bones and stone may last, but musical instruments depending on vibration have mostly been made of organic materials, for instance, wood. In Sweden, there are a few who still know the secret of making a flute from the green, unbroken bark stripped from a willow branch. Wood, reed, animal gut and skin, even horn and shell all perish. Man himself returns to dust. It was the French philosopher Pascal who said, "Man is but a reed, yet a thinking reed." What child from time immemorial has not tried to draw sound from a blade of grass? Blowing into the narrow end of an animal horn is surely as ancient. Gradually, craftsmen developed far more sophisticated instruments from such principles. The familiar Swiss alphorn was an early form of telephone, and its like is found from Tibet to New Guinea, the Amazon and Japan, communicating from hill to hill, valley to valley. It did not take long to discover that such horns could generate more than one note, at first more likely sour, through the principle of resonance called overtones. The same principle operates the willow flute, that of a trapped, vibrating column of air. The finger at the open end and the pressure of the breath combine to change the speed of the vibration. Holes can be added which serve to lengthen or shorten the column of air itself. In the northern province of Maramureş in Romania, the imaginative shepherd likes to add the growl of his own voice. After the thawing of the last great ice age, reeds sprang up throughout the warm and damp Middle East. It was most likely there it was discovered that two pieces of cane could be made to vibrate against each other. In the Near and Far East, the fashioning of metal soon reached a high level, adding to music a new dimension of sound and tone. The long horn with its overtones multiplied in great variety. In fact, human ingenuity in the creation of instruments seems almost inexhaustible, yet I hesitate to call them inventions. Man cannot invent. He can only observe and discover, analyze, repeat, and rearrange. We fit together the signs and clues from the world around us, and out of these we make something new. But with music, these signs and clues, together with our voice, come from within us. It is these we must observe with an inner eye. All other arts and crafts manipulate external objects, but music must have preceded them all, for we make it out of ourselves.
This is a motor car horn, cardboard, and piece of plastic tape.
This ingenious instrument was put together by this Jamaican musician from such diverse elements as cardboard, part of a car horn, and a reed mouthpiece. Out of this unlikely combination comes music, delightfully sweet and clear, and entirely his own.
Sound like a fifi, you know?
I'm more than ready to admit this Jamaican bamboo fiddle as a colleague to my own violin. But is the music genuinely Jamaican? All life, including all matter, whether animate or inanimate, involves vibration of all kinds and speeds. We are constantly bathed in these vibrations. Sound begins toward the low end of the spectrum. On a great church organ, the lowest C vibrates at 16 beats per second, just at the point where we stop being able to distinguish each beat separately. We can see that pitch is but an acceleration of rhythm. In the orchestra, the lowest note made is the C on the modern double bass, vibrating at 32 beats per second. It seems to me nothing more to boast about than the top C I can produce on my violin, 7 octaves higher. This rather ugly sound vibrates at about 4,000 cycles per second. Our hearing can distinguish 2 octaves above that is at around 16,000 cycles. Light occurs towards the middle of the spectrum of vibrations. Higher up, waves are so fast that they pass through matter as if it simply weren't there. But I do believe we must feel and respond to them unconsciously. We respond to slower cycles too. below the level of audible sound. Our brains pulse in waves now called alpha, beta, delta rhythms. They range from 1 or 2 beats to over 20 per second. We recognize the cycle of day and night, the phases of the moon, the seasons of the year. Our bodies react to these with their own corresponding cycles of sleep and various emotional states. We are even affected by the sunspot cycle every 11 years, for it has its part to play in earthquakes and the breaking off of icebergs and the changes of climate. It even has something to do with the best years for French wines. Music keeps us in touch with this entire vibrating world, both outside and in.
It's very different when you go into the evergreens.
Our ears are demanding instruments, seeking out noise even as we sleep, separating the wanted from the unwanted, the intelligible from the random. To understand this process better, I joined the Canadian composer and sound researcher Murray Schafer and luxuriated in his world of sounds.
This is what I would call a hi-fi soundscape, you know, a soundscape in which there's the signal-to-noise ratio is very favorable. There are very few noises here, and therefore every sound that's around us can be heard at a great distance.
I see.
And the city, by contrast, you know, is really a lo-fi soundscape. That is to say, there's so many noises that it's very hard to determine what the signals are. You can't
They're
even...
very confusing.
It's very confusing.
Yes.
Here there are few enough sounds that you can hear the birds, for instance.
Yes, separately.
Like if we stand here, we can hear sounds all around us,
yes,
and sometimes from quite a great distance.
Yes.
Not just a hush, but the kind of roar, very soft roar,
yes,
which in a heavy wind gets to be quite ferocious. Yes. Very different from a deciduous yes, forest. Totally different.
Yes. Lovely.
And again, the birds from all around us, and some far away, some close by. Yeah. In the city, you'd never hear sounds as far away as those dogs we heard barking.
What has always bothered me, traveling, is the sense of remoteness from what my eye sees and would love, and my whole being would love to partake of.
Yes.
One sees mountains, one sees streams,
yes,
but until one has really felt it, sensed it, and tasted it,
yes,
it remains something totally divorced,
yes,
hardly different from its visual appearance on the cinema screen.
Yes.
Although I had heard of Murray Schafer's soundscapes, I never imagined what fun they could be. Oh, what an extraordinary place. Whatever is this?
This is...
oh, this is heavenly. And it's open to the sky.
This is what I wanted to show you.
Now, knowing you, I'm sure these make sounds.
Yes.
I can't wait to hear them, because of all places I've ever been to, together with you, it's a listening world.
Listen. Let's start some of it.
Where is the gong?
Try and figure it out.
Oh, there it is. No.
No. That's not the one you hear. It's here.
I can look. Oh, that, of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
You hear the very light one when the nail hits, and then the heavy one. And then you can hear these too, a little bit less, because they're all moving. You know?
Yes.
With the nail just touching you. Out of the one surface, you can get two quite different sounds.
And
it's a revitalization.
Yes. An extraordinary thing, too, are the rhythms, because you get very complex rhythmic patterns, very complex.
When we were building it, you see, that was the thing, to try, when we started, it's very easy to get one sound.
Yes.
And then when you add a second sound, it's got to be in counterpoint with the first one. I mean, there's no point in just having everything go at once. So you've got to cantilever everything so that one thing will trigger something else, and then something else will start gently to move, and then something else will go from that.
There are still certain things that I can't wait to hear that I haven't heard. I don't believe I've heard
the piano.
The piano, have I?
Yeah, watch your head. See, it bounces up and down. These things on this wire just do a little dance over top of it at random over there. Sometimes
Best
it works.
use I've ever seen a piano put to.
Well, it was an old piano.
And will last forever. It'll last much longer
Yeah.
this way than those that need to be tuned
Yeah.
and looked after all
Yeah.
the time.
You know the trick to discovering these properties? Listen, if you went to a dump,
Yes.
or a rubbish heap,
Oh, I shall
and
see
simply
rubbish heaps
picked
in a
up
new
things
light now.
like this, you see, and struck them together,
There's
you
nothing
get no
at all.
sound.
No, you must leave them free.
You have to, that's right, and you have to find the node. You have to actually find the node in this vibrating column, you see? So if you hold it at the end, for instance, come here for a minute, tap this one against mine, and let me hold it different places, and you'll notice the difference. Still dead, all right.
That sounds
hear
a little
it?
better.
You see?
Yes.
We're finding the right place.
That's
there
better.
There we go.
That's
There.
much better.
Now you've got
but
the
the
clear
middle
sound.
is dead.
The middle is dead. If I were to hold it in the middle, you'd get a dead sound too. Tap it in the middle.
Yes.
See?
But
Because that's a loop.
I see.
And these would be nodes. And if you
Yes.
can find the node and then attach your wire to the node,
So
then you get a brilliant
so that
resonant sound.
actually this is far from random. Each place where you have attached it is the precise
Oh yes,
place.
the precise place. That's right. Yes.
It is
Same
a work
thing
of
with all
art.
those-
It's-
all
it's a-
those bars. We worked very hard to find just the right place.
It didn't take long to discover that this delicate, gigantic mobile was to be set in motion by a human motor.
You want to get on this end and I'll
Yes.
get on. You get on first. All right. Now, that's the push of it. That's it.
I can't hear the piano. Oh, yes. But it is...
The after effects are beautiful. Listen
Yes,
to the way it calms down.
Of course. That is, in a way, the most beautiful part, because you hear the individual sounds stopping.
Yeah. Let's listen and see what the last one is that we hear. It's amazing.
Wonderful. It's a lesson in listening. It's something that every child should have recourse to.
Yeah.
It's the best training in the world.
Isn't it?
It's the only
Actually,
training.
what they should do is build one.
Yes.
Because when you build it, then you discover all the properties of sound
course.
that are inherent in these objects.
And it teaches you to refine your hearing, to listen to other things, to try to understand other things.
And you know a good way to do that? If you take a group of kids out on a walk, and you just, as a gang, and you say, we're going to listen to the sounds, of course, everyone will go out and talk.
Yeah.
So the best way to do it is a very simple thing, is to say, I want everyone to walk, one behind the other, just out of earshot of the footsteps of the person ahead of you.
Yes.
And kids love to do that, you know, listening for the footsteps of the person ahead of them.
Yeah.
And that puts them in a private cocoon.
It's sort of a
acoustic cocoon of their own.
Red Indian walk, isn't it?
It's a Red Indian walk. I think it would be a good thing for children to just to experiment building something like this.
Yes.
Because you learn about the acoustic properties that are inherent in any object, and you turn it into a sound object by finding out what makes it
Well,
sound.
the Africans have that approach to any object. I've often noticed that they won't judge by the visual aspect of an object. They'll go to an object and knock it.
And knock it. It's beautiful.
And they don't judge of an object until they hear it.
Yeah.
Tell me, when did you put this up?
Just the other day.
Just the other day?
Yeah, preparation for you.
Well, you couldn't have prepared
Well, we were going to
anything.
do an interview, weren't we? So we decided we'd make a little teeter-totter and...
Let's start it again.
Okay.
Our ears are constantly on the alert. This adventure with Murray Schafer made me sharply aware that while we may have eyelids, we have no ear lids. The deaf alone know a world of total silence and isolation. From the very dawn of life, living creatures were sensitive to light, touch, and the presence of food. But for a long time, they did not hear. They detected pressure, currents, and direction in water, helped by an organ controlling the sense of balance. fish developed the midline, a sensitive line down both sides of the body, responding to movement in the water with ever greater subtlety. Response to light had by now developed into the eye. Hearing, as such, did not become a necessity until that moment when a few inquisitive fish left their maternal home to explore dry land. The impulse may have been the need for a safe place in which to lay their precious eggs, or a recession of the oceans and rivers, or perhaps simply the reaching upward towards the light. Whatever prompted it, the move was of cosmic importance. And now that the pressure of water was gone, some organ was needed to detect pressure changes in the air. The organ of balance was by this time the pair of semicircular canals which most animals share. By some process yet unsolved, the midline of the fish became grafted to them, and this new organ began to detect vibrations in the air. The point I'm trying to make is that hearing came relatively late in the scale of evolution, actually being the last of the 5 senses to develop. By this time, a rudimentary brain with a primitive awareness existed. From the very start, hearing was deeply linked to our emotional states, to fear and pleasure, search and escape. And so it came about that the ears performed most of the functions of the old midline of the fish. They guide, inform, and warn us of the presence of others. Music, together with our emotions, belong in the right hemisphere of the brain. But spoken language and written mathematics, together with our powers of analysis, belong in the left hemisphere. Those mysterious vibrations of music enable us instantly to communicate and to share our feelings with all around us through its own grammar and structure, which correspond to our very way of thinking and feeling. Sound travels through every medium except the emptiness of outer space. Invisible yet all but palpable, sound belongs to each animal like a fingerprint, allowing like and unlike to recognize one another. We now know that whales can sing to each other over immense ocean distances. Here at the Victoria Aquarium, Paul Horn demonstrates that whales can also respond to music, offering their reply as though they belong to the same tribe of mammals. The Eskimo's dancing and singing of the tale of his great fishing catch is as vivid as any image. He boasts, like any fisherman does, of the size of the fish and the difficulty of the struggle. Like the songs of Ukona and the Kalahari, this is music of the life of man. Yet, within our brain, nature, with wonderful precision, adaptability, and selectivity, has separated music from speech. year, the Plains Indians of North America celebrate the worship of the sun, covering wooden teepee structures with brightly dyed banners of cloth and feathers. These move in the wind, catch and reflect the light, blending with the sound of the chant in homage to the life-giving warmth and power of sunlight. The use of a holy place only once is an ancient one, and when this ceremony is over, this site will be abandoned, never to be used again. Year by year, it returns to its natural state. Are these temporary temples nearer to God than our immovable shrines? The power of music in worship and mourning is timeless, doubtless as old as our own mortality. Here among the Mendi of New Guinea, we witness the funeral of a young man, mourned by his family and the entire village. In the voice, music and speech become one, the chant rising and falling with the word. A young life prematurely cut off brings forth weeping. But in Senegal, the death of an elder animates the celebration of the very gift of life to one and all. Past adventures are mimed, danced, relived, and the whole community gives voice to a gaiety that lessens the loss through the binding, healing power of music. The helping hand of music in daily toil is so basic that it hardly needs commentary. Rhythm coordinates the movements as singing alleviates weariness and melody the monotony. And from among all of us, singers and dancers, there began to emerge the more gifted, the first specialists. When they become as nimble as these dancers, they galvanize the whole tribe, creating joy and excitement, lifting every heart. From anthropological evidence, it appears that chanting is at least 500,000 years old, while speech is a mere 80,000. Pure gesture and sound were not sufficiently specific, and a practical solution was needed to provide vocal communication of another kind. Thus, I'm convinced music preceded language in the evolution of man.
Music and speech are not the same. Words relate to things, to actions, and help us deal with the real world. Music relates to another reality, our inner state of being, and to a greater reality beyond immediate survival. We may mold music, but it molds us and moves us far more deeply than words. It is also audible mathematics, for it states those universal and eternal truths which express all proportions and all speeds. It is the meeting place of the tangible and the intangible.
Amid the beauty of Persepolis, as within the splendid palaces of Sumer and Babylon, there certainly was music some 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. Unfortunately, no trace of its notation survives. Recently, the Syrian musician Abed Azrieh recreated from the oldest descriptions and the most ancient living musical traditions of the Middle East a setting for the epic legend of King Gilgamesh, regarded as a half-god, and his pagan friend Enkidu. This is his conception of what that music might have sounded like in those remote times.
وعلى ألواح من حجر دون ما فعله وما رآه.
How enthralling it is to trace music so far back, with its magical properties lending added grandeur to legends. Some instruments were considered so sacred that their very construction was kept secret even from the eyes of kings. This harp from Ur, carefully reconstructed, is the oldest surviving instrument of the string family, dating to 5000 BC. Over 5,000 years ago in China, Japan, and other parts of the Far East, music had become a fully developed and refined art. In the 7th century BC, the Chinese poet Lili Kim wrote, "Virtue is our favorite flower. Music is the perfume of that flower." The Japanese koto is another instrument whose origins can be traced far back to the Chinese chin in use before 2000 BC. Both are still in current use, and their music is built around the interval of the fifth. It would seem that the Chinese were the first to establish the circle of fifths, advancing that very same theory later discovered by Pythagoras, who was unaware of Chinese musical theory. The interval of the fifth is no doubt the most important one in most of the music of the world.
It was considered magical, for it reflected the number 3. It is the first new sound in the row of overtones. And by building new sounds upon others, you establish a row of fifths, which is still the way all string instruments are tuned. I will give you an example. As tuned on the violin, G, D, A, E. And if I had a fifth string, it would be tuned B. Now, when these 5 notes are put within the compass of 1 octave,
These are the notes that you will hear, which is none other than the basic pentatonic scale the Chinese adopted many, many thousands of years ago. The pentatonic scale is a series of 5 notes, to which the Chinese later did add 2 more, forming the 7-note series we call a major scale. Yet so sacred was the 5-note scale that it was preserved for use in spiritual or religious music. It is a curious thought that this scale was considered sacred because it is so pure, so clean, having no inbuilt contradictions, and therefore no need of any resolutions. All the intervals are interrelated and strong, built up as they are from the 1/5. However, the people who danced and sang spontaneously always wanted scales which would be more interesting, more tantalizing, and which the Church, for thousands of years, whether it was the Chaldean, the Samaritan, or the Jewish, did its best to avoid and ban. The Catholic Church banned this interval, which is known as the triton. It's the nearest to the 5th and would resolve, but it can also resolve. And this ambiguity of resolution into 2 completely different keys was what made it be considered as an instrument of the devil. It was called the diabolus, and therefore it was excluded. As long as people remained with the pentatonic scale, there was no danger. All civilizations have had their scales and their modes. For the Chinese, music and ethics were a unity. Confucius wrote, "When music leads the people's minds toward the right ideals and aspirations, we may see the emergence of a great nation." From one end of the earth to the other, over the ages, musicians have enjoyed trying to evoke and imitate the sounds of nature, especially those heavenly singers, the birds in the sky. But our music is more than the sounds of nature. It is a living structure. I've often thought that the very simplest musical form resembles a leaf folded upon itself, 2 halves like our body, a simple repetition. But then, music being a modeling of time, we require memory, for how can we repeat unless we remember? And with these simple elements, we can begin to build. A plus A, and our classical music consists of hardly more than 2 halves repeating each. And then, gradually, we began to fill in the middle, fill the form with enormous developments, as Beethoven did. And then, if you wish to compose a melody, you would first have to have a natural rhythmic pulse. And the simplest rhythmic pattern you can think of is ram, pa-pum, pa-pum, pa-pum. Then we've had our pentatonic scale, a succession of notes, which you've heard, ra-ra-ra-ra-reem. And if you're in the proper mood and feel tender about it, you would possibly sing ram, ti-tim, ta-tam, ti-tim, ta-tim, ta-tim, ta-tam, which you all know. Surely no ancient civilization held music to be more important to its moral and aesthetic life than did that of classical Greece. Of all the glorious sights, none evokes that time more powerfully than the place to which thousands of pilgrims came every year, the temple of Apollo raised high up on Mount Parnassus at Delphi. You are hearing the hymn to Apollo, probably the oldest surviving fragment of ancient notated music in the world. This music was of such significance that it was inscribed in letter notation on this stone from Delphi some 2,500 years ago. You can just see the notes right above the words. The ancient Greeks knew man in his wholeness, for they understood and embodied and gave due respect to the duality of his nature, the one side striving towards clarity, moderation, and temperance, the other driven towards the fantastic and the orgiastic. The light and the spirit of man were embodied in Apollo, god of music, both art and science. The dark and visceral side of man by Dionysus, god of those ecstatic, intoxicating urges that took their particular form of more sensual expression in a different kind of poetry and dance, and, I'm convinced, in a chromatic form of musical scale. Dancing was of great importance in ancient Greece and remains so to this day. In older Greek communities, notably those along the southern coast of the Black Sea, the old traditions were faithfully preserved. One of them is the sera, a war dance from Pontus, whose people still speak a dialect containing within it many ancient Greek phrases. It seems to me that it is the pagan in each one of us which is the basically creative element, that the exuberance, profusion, and power of artistic expression is born of the one fertility. From the island of Carpathos comes the servos, danced in this way without alteration for centuries. Because it moves to the left, it is believed to be a dance in honor of the forces of the lower world. Because popular dancing was continually practiced and handed down by example, habit, and communal custom, certain dances have survived as a living art, whereas, strangely enough, its sister arts in the form of written music and written words have not. The prescribed notation of the day, a form of syllabic solfège, could not possibly convey the exact pitch, nor can any notation ever devised convey the full expression and texture of living sound. Therefore, what with the interruption of oral traditions and the silent songs and stanzas recorded on stone and papyrus, we should be particularly grateful to find an art form perpetuated by the living experience of the people as it was practiced in classical and pre-classical Greece. As we owe so much beauty and grace to classical Greece, so we owe the word music itself, derived from musiki, meaning all the arts of the 9 muses. The Greeks believed absolutely in cultivating the indivisibility of the beautiful and the good. They used but a single word for both, kalo kagathia, kalos meaning good and agathos beautiful. In this unique civilization, man could become one of the gods, just as gods could descend to earth, an ideal conjunction between man and the stars. It was in this very theater, in the year 606 BC, that the first musical contests were held. The instruments were the lyre and the aulos, a reed instrument of Oriental origin. Just up the hill is the stadion where the Pan-Hellenic Games took place. Music and gymnastics were considered the basic elements of education. A perfect condition of the body was considered as important as the training of the mind, goals toward which every citizen should strive. Gymnastics and games of prowess have been handed down to us from those times as reproduced in the Olympics. Plato held that music should precede and dominate gymnastics, for he believed that the soul should form the body and not the body the soul. The perfection of citizen and state demanded a supervised and imposed musical education. They wished to produce a people distinguished and disciplined and of sound body and mind. It was the flute that often accompanied sacred dances. However, not the flute alone. Legend has it that the infant Hermes killed a turtle and strung across its shell gut strings made from the entrails of an ox stolen from his brother Apollo, thus making the first musical instrument. And then, to appease his brother's anger, he craftily offered him this primitive lyre to play upon. Since then, the god Apollo, his music, his lyre, became the very faith, the drama, the literature, even the architecture of citizen and state. It was here, in this magnificent place, the most sacred in the Greek world, at the very apogee of this noble pagan civilization, that votive dances, perhaps similar to these, expressed the worship of Apollo. The civilization of classical Greece was the first full flowering of European culture, and music was its heart, its very bloodstream. We will still need music when we have spread to the planets and beyond, for music will always remain the one universal language. The truths it reveals are immutable and are valid for all life wherever it may be, whether intellectual, spiritual, physical, emotional, or whether mathematical, intuitive, subjective, or passionate, in all their myriad variations. Like great poetry, which is partly music, being rhythm, melody, and voice, and unlike mere words, which can mislead, music can never lie, for it is a celebration of life. Tolerance and compassion should be the byproducts of all art. Beauty and truth, as combined in music, may lead to that awareness of self and of others, bringing equilibrium to our lives and our civilizations.